As sad and pessimistic as it may sound, affairs are something that has been happening since, well, we don't know. But let's just say it's a common practice that has been so common in our world that some people just accept that it can happen and are never afraid to start a rumor mill about who's with who when no one's looking. When it comes to Hollywood, though, it's had a reputation for decades about its stars having very public relationships and even marriages, but then going out in secret and being other people. While many tried to keep it under wraps so they wouldn't hurt their public image, others wore it like a badge of honor to show their clout. The Hollywood affairs that we're about to show you were ones that truly altered the industry in various ways. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. 7. Jean Harlow and William Powell. Let's start with one that definitely had an old-school Hollywood vibe, simply because you wouldn't have expected these two to hook up. And yet, they did. Jean Harlow was one of the truly great starlets of her period, and one of the originators of the name Blonde Bombshell. Then there was William Powell, a leading man in Hollywood who had a rather suave demeanor about him and always seemed cool on screen. When they were on screen together, their chemistry was undeniable, and perhaps that's why they were in a hidden relationship. One of the reasons for that, ironically, was because of Powell, who had already been married twice. Harlow didn't mind, and so they kept things quiet. You might not think this an odd thing in today's world, but in the times of old Hollywood, it was very much a sin in the eyes of the public to be together without being married or heading that way. These two never wanted that negativity on them, so they hid their relationship from everyone. And the tragedy didn't stop there, as Harlow died at just 26, from kidney failure of all things. Powell was so heartbroken by her death that he willingly paid for her funeral, and even the crypt where she was buried in. Why? Because he wanted to ensure that she would be remembered by all for how good she was. Adding to the pain was that he couldn't truly talk about the emotional turmoil he was in because of the secretive nature of their relationship. 6. Anthony Perkins and Tab Hunter. This next one is tragic for a different reason. While the world has come a long way with its views on the LGBTQIA+ community, it most definitely wasn't that accepting in the days of old Hollywood. While not everyone was a Christian, many views from that religion were carried over in the public, including that same-gender relationships were taboo and shouldn't be accepted or even tolerated. While we won't go into the ABs that many suffered because of those narrow viewpoints, we will tell you how it affected Anthony Perkins and Tab Hunter. The two were stars of the screen in the 1950s and beyond, and when they met, they fell for one another. However, due to the situation they were in, they couldn't come out as gay men, else face ridicule, humiliation, not to mention the end of their careers. So, what did they do? They did everything they could to fool everyone, including doing double dates with women together so that everyone would think they were just best friends who hung out a lot. When the studios found out about their affair, they tried to force it to stop. Not because they cared about the relationship itself, but they didn't want to lose out of their stars who were making them serious money. Yet, ironically, it was the movies that broke them apart. After 3 years of their relationship, a competitive rivalry brewed between them, and it eventually severed the relationship. While they did try to reconcile later, it didn't work out, and it makes you wonder what would have happened if they just left Hollywood together and didn't come back. 5. Clark Gable and Loretta Young. We're trying to show you the many layers of Hollywood in this video so that you can understand just how dark things got at times for those who had found the loves of their lives. Yet in the case of Clark Gable and Loretta Young, this isn't a happy tale in the slightest. Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood in many people's minds, and Loretta Young was an up-and-coming starlet known for her looks and talents. The two eventually did a movie together called Call of the Wild, and Gable fell for her. The problem? He was already married, but that didn't stop him from doing what he felt he could. They worked closely together, and then on a train ride home after filming, he SA'd her. Naturally, Young tried to keep it a secret, but things got complicated when she found out she was pregnant with his child. The studio roared into action to protect Gable's reputation and helped Young stay away until her child was born. Then she actually put her up for adoption and then adopted her back so that there would be even less suspicion on both her and Gable. It was only when Loretta Young wrote her memoir that the truth finally came out. And just as bad was that when Young told Gable of his daughter's birth, he refused to acknowledge her, nor did he help Young with finances or to raise the child. That should show you the mindset of certain golden age actors. They cared only for their careers and public images, and not about the damage they may have caused to people. 4. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. Given what happened in that last entry, it's only fair we talk about a more classic affair, where the two sides actually loved one another. But to talk about Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy is a bit complicated for the simple reason that there is a question as to whether their affair was real at all. Confused? Well, officially, Spencer Tracy was a married man. But after meeting Katharine Hepburn, they had a decades-long affair. Tracy himself was Catholic, so he had to do his best to keep the affair quiet, as divorce quite literally wasn't an option for him. However, there are some who dispute that, especially since one Hollywood insider claimed that it was all a constructed lie to hide who Tracy and Hepburn really were. Confused even more now? The insider said that Hepburn was a lesbian and even asked Tracy to help her find partners, which he happily did. Tracy, meanwhile, was bisexual, which would cause his own problems. If you believe the affair story, though, the two were inseparable in all the ways that matter, and that fact is backed up by various things Hepburn said after Tracy passed. She was there for him in his darkest times, as he was a very conflicted person due to the choices that he made. She said flat out in an interview that she loved him and wanted to be with him, and she was. Perhaps we'll never know the full extent of their relationship. After all, even Hepburn said it was complicated. And isn't that always the way in Hollywood? 3. Liza Minnelli and Peter Allen. We're throwing you a bit of a twist with this next one, as Liza Minnelli and Peter Allen were a full-on married couple. That's right, the affair wasn't between them, as they were a true couple. Minnelli was the daughter of Judy Garland, who was literal Hollywood royalty, and Minnelli ate up the screen whenever she could. Allen, meanwhile, was a single, and it was Judy herself who helped pair them up. The problem? Well, Peter was gay. Oops. Remember, this was a time in the world where being openly gay was basically blasphemy, and as such, people like Peter Allen had to go and marry women to try and make themselves seem normal. Eventually, he opened up to Liza, and she was completely stunned. And that stunning reveal came to a head on their literal wedding night when she caught him in bed with another man. This sparked a hatred between her and him, and she cheated on him to basically get back at him for what he had failed to tell her. The two kept taking shots at one another before eventually a line was crossed, and the two had to separate, with everyone coming out in the open. Easily the biggest irony here is that if there was no need for secrecy, this marriage wouldn't have happened in the first place, and the scandal wouldn't be a part of Hollywood history. 2. Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey. If you've ever wondered just how far these Hollywood scandals could go, allow us to tell you the tale of Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey. Chaplin was the kind of silent film movies in many respects, and had a reputation on screen and mostly off that was beyond reproach. And then he met Lita Grey. What was the problem with that? She was a very young teenager when she came to star in one of his films. The two had an affair right then and there, and that would have destroyed both of them if it had come out. Oh, and Charlie was 35 at the time. Yeah, so when Lita Grey got pregnant, Charlie had to act fast to save them both, and actually took her to Mexico so that they could get married in secret. Yet, if you think the problems ended there, you'd be wrong. Things only escalated from there, as Chaplin didn't just cheat on Grey, but he tried to control her endlessly. When the two went to court for a divorce, things got out into the public, and it became easily one of the biggest scandals that Hollywood had ever endured. It goes to show that just because someone acted all carefree on screen doesn't mean that they were that way off of it. 1. Vivien Leigh, Laurence Olivier, and Jill Esmond. Oh yeah, we're ending this one with a really big scandal. It starts with Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier, who were both prominent people in Hollywood and had an instant attraction to one another when they met. Leigh even noted to her friend that, "That's the man I'm going to marry." It all seems like the perfect Hollywood romance, right? Except the two of them were already married at the time. Leigh was in a loveless marriage with a man who didn't approve of her acting ambitions, and Olivier was married to Jill Esmond, who happened to be the daughter of famous actors from the UK. What may have started as a mutual attraction became a full-on affair, as Leigh and Olivier started being with one another before their divorces to their partners were even finalized. Olivier would try to justify this later by noting it was true love and not lust, which may be true, but that doesn't excuse the cheating. Ready for the twist? Even after finally getting married, their relationship was anything but a fairy tale. Both sides had issues, and Leigh actually cheated on Olivier with Peter Finch. While the two did have a mutual respect that carried carried on after they parted ways. It's quite telling the troubles they went to in order to be together, only for it not to last. In many ways, the story of Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier is a perfect metaphor for Hollywood itself. Shiny on the surface, seductive in its promise, but often flawed, chaotic, and heartbreaking underneath. Like so many of the affairs we've discussed, it began in a whirlwind of passion and glamour, but ended in emotional wreckage, miscommunication, and regret. These weren't just relationships gone wrong, they were mirrors held up to the toxic mix of celebrity, public pressure, and industry interference that defined the golden age. Because the truth is, Hollywood didn't just allow affairs to happen, it often manufactured the circumstances for them. Studios routinely paired actors together, sent them on publicity tours designed to stir up tabloid rumors, or encouraged romantic entanglements to keep attention on their films. But when those relationships took darker turns, or when a pregnancy, scandal, or heartbreak threatened to disrupt the fantasy, the same studios would silence, hide, and manipulate the situation to protect their bottom line. Stars were commodities, desirable, disposable, and carefully curated for mass consumption. The emotional fallout of these affairs was often left entirely on the shoulders of the stars themselves, particularly the women. So many of them were forced to carry the weight of shame, secrecy, or betrayal in an era where their reputations were far more fragile than their male counterparts. If a man cheated, it was often brushed off as boys being boys. If a woman was found out, she could be blacklisted, labeled as difficult, or quietly forced out of the spotlight. These double standards weren't just unfair, they were devastating to careers, identities, and lives. In other cases, the stars themselves leaned into the deception, not because they wanted to live a lie, but because the truth would have cost them everything. Anthony Perkins and Tab Hunter couldn't be honest about their love for one another without risking the destruction of their careers. Peter Allen, like so many gay men in show business at the time, felt he had to marry a woman to protect his image, even if it meant hurting her in the process. The pain that came from these secrets wasn't just personal, it was systemic. The industry's refusal to accept, support, or even acknowledge the complexity of human relationships made truth itself a liability. And perhaps the most tragic thing of all is that so many of these stories didn't need to happen this way. If the world had been more accepting, if the industry had been more human, if power and image hadn't been placed above authenticity and well-being, we might be talking about romances instead of affairs, about love stories instead of scandals. These weren't inherently bad people. They were flawed human beings, navigating a brutal system that demanded perfection while tolerating dysfunction behind the scenes. But even in the midst of the lies and heartbreak, there were still glimmers of real love, passion, and sacrifice. William Powell paying for Jean Harlow's funeral. Katharine Hepburn standing by Spencer Tracy despite their secrecy. Even Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier, whose relationship fell apart, still spoke highly of one another in the years that followed. These weren't clean endings, but they were human ones. It's also worth reflecting on how much, or how little, has changed. Yes, we live in a world that's more open now. Same-sex relationships don't end careers the way they once did. Female celebrities are less bound by the suffocating expectations of yesteryear. Social media has given stars more control over their image than the studio PR machines ever did. But Hollywood is still an image-driven machine, and while the surface may look more progressive, the deeper patterns of secrecy, exploitation, and emotional fallout haven't disappeared entirely. Affairs still happen in modern Hollywood, plenty of them in fact. Some are shrugged off with a wink and a shrug, others explode into scandal with headlines, interviews, and messy public breakups. And the public? We eat it up. We judge, speculate, romanticize, and even idolize these relationships, often forgetting that they involve real people with real emotions and consequences. The celebrity bubble may look different now, but it's still built on the same foundation: performance over reality, desire over truth, money over accountability. So as we look back on these infamous love affairs from Hollywood's golden age, we shouldn't just ask, who was with who, or how did it end? Instead, we should ask, what kind of system made these relationships so volatile to begin with? What pressures were these stars under? What secrets were they forced to carry? And how many were simply trying to survive in a world that demanded they be icons before they could even be themselves? Because beyond the affairs, The scandals and the headlines, these stories remind us of something simple yet profound. Stars may seem larger than life, but they're still human. They fall in love, they make mistakes, they hide their truths, and they often pay the price for trying to live freely in a world that values illusion more than authenticity. And maybe that's why we're still drawn to these stories, not just because they're salacious or dramatic, but because they're deeply, tragically real. They're reminders of what happens when the heart wants something the world tells it can't have, and what people will do to chase that feeling, no matter the cost. And that's all from old Hollywood and the affairs that many didn't see coming, and yet were a key part of the industry's history. How many of these affairs did you know about before watching this video? And which ones did you just learn about for the first time? Which of these relationships honestly reminds of what has happened in the modern age of Hollywood? Or did we leave a classic affair out? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the channel.